This is the story of a man named Carol Bonnet. He's been dead for 46 years. But for 33 of those years, nobody knew who killed him. Worse, nobody seemed to be looking anymore. The case had been filed away in a drawer, the evidence sealed in boxes, the killer walking free with absolute confidence that he'd committed the perfect crime. He believed the system had failed. He was right. What he didn't understand was that the system was about to evolve in ways that would ultimately destroy him. The metamorphosis began quietly, in the margins of technology and bureaucracy. A database that didn't exist when the murder happened. A cold case unit that wouldn't open for 3 decades. A detective somewhere in Florida asking a simple question. A technician in Omaha deciding to run an old fingerprint through a computer. The convergence of these seemingly unrelated events would expose a truth that had been hidden in plain sight since 1978. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive on a schedule. Sometimes it arrives whenever we finally develop the tools to recognize it. The 1970s in Omaha, Nebraska were a period of quiet transition. The city's historic core was slowly being reclaimed. Warehouse districts were transforming into commercial spaces, and neighborhoods that had once thrived were finding new identities. Bishop Clarkson Hospital stood as an institution that had been part of Omaha's landscape since the late 19th century, a stable landmark in a shifting urban environment. Carol Bonnet was neither famous nor visible to the broader public. He existed in the margins of other people's stories. Born in the early part of 1917, Bonnet had lived through the defining crises of the 20th century. Economic collapse, World War, social transformation, and had settled into a life of quiet routine. He was employed at the hospital, a steady presence in an institution that employed hundreds. His personal life remained largely private. He maintained an apartment in the downtown district, kept it meticulously organized, and divided his time between work and a modest social life. The people who encountered Bonnet consistently described the same quality: generosity, sometimes to a degree that bordered on naivety. He would strike up conversations with strangers in neighborhood bars. He would purchase drinks for people he barely knew. He kept a 1964 Buick, and he would loan it to acquaintances without hesitation. These weren't the behaviors of a cautious man. They were the behaviors of someone who operated under the assumption that most people, if given an opportunity, would treat him with the same decency he extended to them. That assumption in his case proved catastrophic. By mid-October 1978, 2 men had recently stayed in his apartment. One of them retained access to his vehicle. Bonnet lived with the kind of vulnerability that only becomes visible after a catastrophe has already occurred. On October 15th, something fractured that orderly existence. The details of exactly how and when remain obscured by time, but what followed was irreversible. When Bonnet failed to appear for his shift at the hospital, nobody immediately grasped the significance. But when he didn't show up again the following day, concern crystallized into action. A colleague contacted the superintendent of his building and requested a welfare check. What they discovered was a scene of violent rupture. Bonnet lay on the floor of his apartment, unclothed, with a single stab wound penetrating his left upper abdomen. The wound was fatal. The pathologist who conducted the autopsy determined that Bonnet had been deceased for more than 48 hours by the time he was discovered, placing the actual moment of his death on the 15th 2 full days before anyone came searching. The apartment itself told a story of chaos and violation. The space that normally reflected Bonnet's meticulous habits bore all the marks of a violent struggle. Newspapers were scattered across the floor. Used beer cans accumulated in the kitchen sink and refuse containers. Cigarette butts filled the waste baskets. 3 towels, each containing biological material, hair, and other cellular evidence, lay near the body. The killer had been methodical in ways both deliberate and revealing. The telephone cord had been deliberately severed, severing Bonnet's potential line to emergency services. His wallet was gone. The cash that he carried had vanished. The 1964 Buick was nowhere to be found. Yet the front door bore no evidence of forced entry. The locks remained intact. The frame was undamaged. Whoever had killed Carol Bonnet had either been voluntarily admitted or possessed a key. But there was something else at the scene. Something that shifted the entire nature of the crime from a robbery turned violent into something far more calculated. Investigators recovered a piece of newspaper bearing a handwritten message in blue ink. The words were deliberate, taunting, dripping with contempt for the people who would investigate the crime. "I'm leaving this crime with only one clue. Find it yourself, pig." Below that, "Die, pig." And at the bottom, a single word that carried its own weight in 1978, "Helter." The killer wasn't attempting to conceal his presence. He was broadcasting his superiority. He was challenging the investigators, the technicians, the detectives who would inevitably process the scene. He believed that he had committed a crime so perfect, orchestrated so completely, that no amount of investigation would ever catch him. The note was an act of supreme arrogance, a killer so confident in his own cleverness that he felt comfortable mocking the very system designed to find him. For 33 years, that arrogance would appear justified. The Omaha Police Department did everything right in 1978. The crime scene was processed with the diligence and professionalism that the era permitted. A crime lab technician named Michael Stone, then in his late 20s, arrived at the apartment and conducted a methodical examination. Stone photographed the scene, cataloged the physical evidence, and dusted surfaces for fingerprints with the precision that characterized careful forensic work. What Stone discovered was remarkable. The latent prints he lifted from various surfaces within the apartment were of exceptional quality. The impressions recovered from the inner surface of the bathroom door were particularly outstanding, clear, detailed, containing the kind of unique ridge characteristics that could definitively identify a specific individual if a matching exemplar existed. The medicine cabinet yielded prints. Beer cans in the kitchen produced prints. The coffee table bore prints. The telephone, its cord now severed, was dusted for prints. The concentration of prints in certain areas, particularly the bathroom and the medicine cabinet, suggested a coherent narrative. The killer had apparently committed the act of violence, then sought refuge in the bathroom, likely attempting to wash away the evidence of his deed. His hands, slick with blood, had touched the door frame, reached for the cabinet, left a physical record of his presence that persisted long after he'd departed. Stone initialed each card, documented each discovery, and began the process of comparison. This was where the investigation encountered its first, most significant barrier. The fingerprint comparison in 1978 was an entirely manual process. There was no centralized digital database. There was no national system that could scan an unknown print and search millions of records simultaneously. Instead, the process was painstaking and labor-intensive. An examiner would sit with two sets of prints side by side, the unknown print from the crime scene and a known exemplar from a suspect's record, and study them with meticulous attention. The comparison focused on ridge patterns, the specific architecture of whorls and loops and arches. A single comparison could consume hours. An entire departmental file could take weeks or months to exhaust. The Omaha Police Department did what they could. They compared Stone's prints against their local records. They sent teletype requests to other jurisdictions, asking if the fingerprints matched anyone in their systems. The responses came back negative, one after another. No match, no connection, no breakthrough. Meanwhile, the stolen vehicle surfaced. On October 19th, just 4 days after the murder, Bonnet's 1964 Buick was discovered abandoned on the streets of Cicero, Illinois, a suburb positioned directly adjacent to Chicago. But the car had been altered. The original Nebraska license plates had been removed and replaced with stolen Illinois plates. Plates that had been reported missing on October 16th. The substitution was deliberate, calculated to obscure the vehicle's point of origin as it traveled across state lines. The Cicero police conducted their own processing of the vehicle. Inside, they found additional cigarette butts, the same brand as those that littered Bonnet's apartment. Only 2 fingerprints from the interior of the car were legible enough for analysis. One belonged to Bonnet himself. The other was unknown and produced no match against the suspects Omaha detectives were then considering. The discovery was simultaneously promising and frustrating. The appearance of the Buick in Illinois suggested that the killer was not a local Omaha resident. He was likely transient, connected to the Chicago area, familiar with the territory where he'd abandoned the vehicle. But Cicero in the late 1970s was not a small town. It was a dense suburb with a complicated history and complex social networks. Finding a specific individual among that population based on a vehicle and an unmatched fingerprint bordered on impossible. The investigation stalled. Michael Stone, for his part, never abandoned the work. He would compare that exceptional bathroom door fingerprint against new records as they arrived. Fresh suspects, updated databases from other departments, new leads that occasionally surfaced, but the technology simply could not deliver what the case required. Stone eventually retired from the Omaha Police Department, having spent his career doing exactly what he was supposed to do, with precision and dedication, and having been unable to solve the crime because the tool that would eventually solve it didn't exist. The fingerprint cards were filed away. The evidence was sealed in containers and moved to a property room. The case was assigned a number and placed in storage, and the years began their accumulation. While the investigation slowly died of technological inadequacy, Jerry Watson was living his life. He'd been 19 years old in 1978. He was from Cicero, Illinois, the same suburb where Bonnet's stolen Buick would eventually be recovered, in fact just blocks from his own residential area. In the fall of 1978, Watson had traveled to Omaha to visit a relative. During that visit, something shifted. Whether it was a calculation, an impulse, or something between, Watson made the choice to kill Carol Bonnet. After the murder, Watson drove the stolen Buick back to his home territory in Illinois. He swapped the license plates for stolen ones. He abandoned the vehicle on Cicero's streets, and then he simply continued his life. Over the following 3 decades, Watson moved through America with the fluidity of someone unmoored from consequence. He lived in different states at different times. He used alias names. He committed burglaries. He was arrested multiple times across multiple jurisdictions. Each arrest resulted in his fingerprints being taken, recorded, and filed into whatever local or state system was available at that moment. But here's what Watson didn't understand. Those fingerprints remained isolated. They existed in disconnected islands of criminal records. The fingerprint database in Illinois could not communicate with the fingerprint database in Florida. The records in Nebraska could not query the records in another state. Law enforcement agencies maintain their own systems, their own filing protocols, their own internal organization. Unless a detective knew to send a specific request to a specific agency asking about a specific name, those records remained invisible to each other. Watson's fingerprints multiplied through different jurisdictions, being collected and stored by various law enforcement agencies across the country. But none of those agencies could see the match that was waiting in an evidence box in Nebraska. They existed in parallel universes, unable to communicate, unable to connect. Watson had every reason to believe he'd achieved what he'd set out to achieve. He'd committed a murder, and 30 years had passed without consequences. No detectives had come looking, no investigators had called his name. No one had connected him to the crime. The killer had written his own name, scratched it onto a newspaper at the scene, and then scratched it out, apparently confident that this juvenile act of arrogance would remain forever invisible. He challenged the police to find his clue, and they hadn't found it. From Watson's perspective, he'd won what he couldn't have known was that technology was being constructed that would eventually make his isolation impossible. The FBI began developing AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system, during the 1990s. The project represented one of the most ambitious law enforcement technology initiatives in American history, a centralized searchable database containing the fingerprint records of every arrested individual in the United States, accessible from any participating law enforcement agency. The system went live on July 28, 1999, at a cost that approached $700 million. When it became fully operational, it held the world's largest collection of digitized fingerprints, more than 77 million sets of records submitted by state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies across the nation. The transformation was revolutionary. Before AFIS, submitting a fingerprint to the FBI for comparison could take weeks or even months. A detective in one state would send a physical card or photographs to the FBI, where examiners would manually compare it against whatever records were available. The process was slow, labor-intensive, and dependent on human attention and expertise. After AFI's electronic submissions could be processed and returned in hours, sometimes just 2 hours or less, an entire generation of cases that had been deemed unsolvable suddenly had a pathway toward resolution. Across the country, cold case units began reopening investigations. They would retrieve old evidence that had been preserved but never analyzed, submit fingerprints and DNA samples to AFIs and modern forensic laboratories, and with startling regularity, obtain matches on cases that had been dormant for years, sometimes decades. The technology that Michael Stone had spent his career waiting for finally existed. But AFIs didn't retroactively search old evidence. Someone had to make the decision to retrieve that evidence. Someone had to remember that a case existed. Someone had to initiate the process of entering an old fingerprint into a system that was just beginning to unlock cases across the nation. In Omaha, Michael Stone retired without knowing whether the print he'd so carefully lifted and documented would ever produce a match. For nearly a decade after AFIS went operational, the Bonnet case remained untouched. The evidence sat in sealed containers in a property room, preserved perfectly but never submitted. The technology that could solve the crime was running, but it remained disconnected from the evidence that needed to be solved. In March 2008, the Omaha Police Department made a decision that would prove pivotal. They established a dedicated cold case unit, investigators specifically assigned to re-examine old unsolved homicides with fresh perspectives and modern tools. The Bonnet case, among dozens of others, was pulled from storage and opened for renewed investigation. But the real catalyst came from an unexpected source. In December 2008, the Cold Case Unit received a fax from the Criminal Laboratory Services section of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The inquiry was direct and specific. Had the fingerprint evidence from the Carol Bonnet murder ever been searched through modern automated fingerprint identification systems? Had investigators attempted to match the latent prints against contemporary databases? Had a suspect been identified? The answer was no. Why Florida? The explanation remains somewhat obscured by public records, but Watson had lived in Florida at various points following the murder, using alias names to conceal his identity. Whether the Florida inquiry was triggered by a specific connection to Watson's criminal record, or whether it was part of a broader multi-state cold case review initiative, the precise mechanism remains unclear. What is certain is this: a single inquiry from investigators 1,200 miles away. Investigators examining records and cases that fell outside their immediate jurisdiction prompted a sequence of events that would transform a 30-year-old murder from an unsolved cold case into a solved homicide. 30 years had elapsed. AFIS had been operational for nearly a decade. The evidence was preserved. The database was running, and nobody had connected them. Not because of negligence, not because anyone had forgotten Carol Bonnet, but because the sheer volume of unsolved cases in every police department, in every city, means that old evidence doesn't automatically get re-examined when new technology becomes available. The process requires a decision. It requires work. It requires someone to take initiative. In this instance, it took a law enforcement inquiry from 1,200 miles away. The Cold Case Unit requested that the Omaha Police Department's crime laboratory submit the old fingerprint evidence to AFIS. The task fell to Laura Casey, a senior crime laboratory technician who had joined the Omaha Crime Lab in 1995 and earned certification as a crime scene analyst in 2001. By December 2008, Casey had accumulated more than 13 years of experience working with fingerprint evidence. She understood AFIS intimately. She recognized the potential significance of what she was being asked to do. On December 19, 2008, Casey retrieved the fingerprint evidence from the Bonnet case, the cards that Michael Stone had prepared 30 years earlier. The prints were still clear. 3 decades of storage had not degraded them. The ridge patterns remained distinct and detailed, still carrying the unique characteristics necessary for positive identification, if a matching exemplar existed in the system. Casey sat at her workstation and entered the prints into 2 systems: the Nebraska State Automated Fingerprint Identification System and the FBI's National AFI's database. The print she submitted was the same exceptional one from the bathroom door, the one that Stone had documented with such precision in 1978. The system began its search to comprehend what occurred next. You must understand the scale of AFIs. The database contained more than 77 million fingerprint records. When a latent print is entered, AFIS doesn't simply search for a perfect copy. Instead, the system identifies potential matches based on shared characteristics, ridge patterns, whorls, loops, arches, and ranks them by statistical probability. The system returns a list of candidates for human examination and verification. The process that once required weeks or months of manual comparison now generated a list of possibilities in hours. In less than 5 hours, AFI's returned its results. Among the candidate matches was a set of fingerprints belonging to a man named Jerry Watson. Casey began the detailed analysis. She examined the ridge patterns with precision. She studied the minutiae points, the specific architectural features that create unique identification. She compared the latent print from the 1978 crime scene against Watson's known prints in the system, finding point after point of correspondence. Over the following days, she worked through the comparison with meticulous care. When certainty arrived, she reportedly called out to her colleagues in the crime laboratory. "I think I have a match on this cold case." 30 years. The fingerprint had been sitting in an evidence room for 3 entire decades. Michael Stone had compared it by hand more times than he could count, hoping for a match that the technology of his era could never deliver. And now, because a technician in Florida had sent a fax, because a cold case unit had been established, because a technician in Omaha had decided to enter an old fingerprint into a computer, the system had returned a name in less time than it takes to drive across the city. The name was Jerry Watson. Conviction. The Omaha Police Department now faced the challenge of constructing a prosecutable case against a man who had allegedly committed a murder 3 decades earlier, in an era when most of the potential witnesses were deceased, when the original taunting note had vanished, and when the defense would inevitably argue that the passage of time had compromised the integrity of the evidence. The case was assigned to Detective Doug Harrow, Heraut had entered law enforcement with the Douglas County Sheriff's Department in 1996, later joined the Omaha Police Department, and became a detective in 2005. The Bonnet investigation would become the defining case of his career. Heraut did not work in isolation. He coordinated with crime lab criminalists and Nebraska State Patrol analysts. Together, they began reconstructing a narrative that predated the birth of some of the people now investigating it. The first priority was establishing Jerry Watson's connection to both Omaha and Cicero, Illinois, establishing the geography that would link him to the crime. What emerged was damning. Watson had grown up in Cicero. He lived in a neighborhood just blocks from where Bonnet's stolen 1964 Buick had been recovered in October 1978. He had a relative living in Omaha, whom he visited in the fall of 1978. He was 19 years old at the time of the murder, young transient, and already engaged in criminal activity. After the killing, he had drifted through multiple states, sometimes in Florida, sometimes elsewhere, using alias names to obscure his identity. He continued committing burglaries. He continued getting arrested. And each arrest had added his fingerprints to databases that were slowly, invisibly constructing the framework that would eventually contain him. By the time Laura Casey identified his fingerprint in December 2008, Watson was 50 years old and incarcerated at Lawrence Correctional Center in Illinois, serving time on yet another burglary conviction. He was approaching release. On December 2, 2009, Detective Heraut traveled to Illinois to confront the man whose fingerprints had been recovered inside Carol Bonnet's apartment. Watson agreed to speak. He acknowledged having been in Omaha in 1978. He verified the time frame, the visit to his relative, his presence in the city, but he denied the murder with a confidence that bordered on contempt. "I know that you can't have evidence that said I did it," Watson told Heraut. "You know, 'cause I know I didn't." Watson was playing a game he'd been winning for 30 years. He believed the evidence simply didn't exist. He believed that time had erased whatever trail he'd left behind. He had no knowledge that fingerprints he'd deposited on a bathroom door 3 decades earlier had just been matched by a computer system that didn't exist when he'd left them there. He had no understanding of what was about to unfold. During that conversation, Heraut obtained Watson's DNA sample and fresh fingerprints and palm prints. Then he returned to Omaha carrying something that investigators in 1978 could never have imagined would matter: a reference DNA sample from a suspect identified through a computer database, ready to be compared against physical evidence that had been preserved for more than 3 decades. The evidence had been sitting in the Omaha Police Department property room since 1978. The sealed bags contained cigarette butts, beer cans, towels, and other items collected from the apartment and from the recovered Buick in Cicero. For 30 years, those items had been stored in controlled conditions, untouched, waiting. Heraut sent the evidence to the University of Nebraska Medical Center for DNA analysis using techniques that would have been science fiction when Carol Bonnet was alive. The results returned were comprehensive and devastating to any defense strategy. DNA profiles matching Jerry Watson were recovered from cigarette butts found inside Bonnet's apartment. Additional matching DNA was recovered from cigarette butts found inside the stolen Buick in Cicero. A beer can from the kitchen wastebasket in the apartment also contained Watson's DNA. A palm print recovered from the medicine cabinet, the same cabinet that Michael Stone had dusted 30 years earlier, matched Watson's palm. Each discovery placed Watson at specific locations during a time frame that aligned with the murder. But the defense could argue that this might represent innocent contact. Perhaps Bonnet was known to have guests, and Watson had visited the apartment on a separate occasion unrelated to the killing. Perhaps he'd been present at a time when no violence occurred. Then came the evidence that eliminated all reasonable doubt. Among the 3 towels found near Carol Bonnet's body, towels containing biological material lying beside the victim, investigators recovered a single hair. The hair was sent to the University of Nebraska Medical Center with the rest of the evidence. Laboratory analysis produced a partial DNA profile from that hair. The profile matched Jerry Watson. The statistical weight of that match was staggering. The DNA profile from that hair could be found in only one of every 37.6 million Caucasians, one of every 87.4 million African Americans, one of every 17.5 million Hispanic Americans. This was not hair that could have been deposited during a casual visit weeks or months before the murder. This was hair recovered on material that lay in intimate proximity to Carol Bonnet's body at the moment his life was taken. This was hair found at the scene where violence had occurred, where blood had been spilled, where death had happened. The cigarette butts placed Watson in the apartment. The beer can placed Watson in the kitchen. The palm print placed Watson at the medicine cabinet. The stolen vehicle placed him on the highway traveling toward his hometown. The hair placed him at the body, and then Heraut found the clue. The killer's note had taunted police with the claim that he was leaving behind one clue. For 33 years, that boast had gone unanswered. The original note itself had been sent to the U.S. Secret Service at some point during the initial investigation for handwriting analysis. It was never returned. As far as anyone could determine, it had been lost to history. But Heraut did something painstaking. He went through every single item that had been cataloged from the crime scene. He examined 3 newspapers that had been collected near Bonnet's body: an Omaha World Herald, a Thrifty Nickel classified paper, and an advertisement. Heraut studied them with forensic attention. On the edge of one of the newspapers in blue ink, written in cursive script, were 2 words, Jerry W. Below those words, a deliberate scratch-through obscured the writing, as though the author had second thoughts and attempted to erase the identity he just revealed. The killer had written his own name at the crime scene. Then he'd scratched through it, apparently believing that the line through the letters would render it illegible. He'd left his identity right there in plain sight, apparently amused by the idea that his signature was sitting at the scene of his crime and no one would ever find it. He dared the police to find his clue. His clue was his own name, and it took a detective named Doug Heraut working the case 30 years later to finally see what had been there all along. Retired technician Michael Stone later reflected on that discovery with a kind of sardonic amazement. "I'll go ahead and write my name on here," Stone said, imagining the killer's thought process. "Scratch it out. They'll never find it." Well, Doug found it on November 15, 2010. Jerry Watson was officially charged with first-degree murder and use of a deadly weapon to commit a felony in connection with the killing of Carol Bonnet. An amended charge filed in July 2011 expanded the charge to include both premeditated murder and felony murder committed in the course of a robbery. The trial began on August 16, 2011, in Douglas County District Court. The prosecution was led by Chief Deputy County Attorney Brenda Beadle. Watson's defense was handled by the Douglas County Public Defender's Office. This was a trial uniquely shaped by the passage of time, shaped in ways that most murder cases never have to confront. 33 years had elapsed between the crime and the courtroom appearance. Most of the people who had possessed direct knowledge of Carol Bonnet's life in 1978 were gone. The individuals who had frequented the same bars, visited his apartment, witnessed the neighborhood during that week, they had either died or disappeared from public view. 11 police reports from 1978 witnesses had to be read into the record because the witnesses themselves were no longer alive or available to testify. The prosecution was constructing a case almost entirely from physical evidence and expert testimony, rather than from eyewitness accounts or direct testimony from people who had known the victim. The witnesses who could testify were the surviving professionals. A firefighter who had responded to the emergency call on October 17, 1978, took the stand and described forcing the apartment door open. The pathologist who had performed the autopsy explained the fatal wound. The Michael Stone, the retired crime lab technician, described lifting the fingerprints 33 years earlier. A Cicero evidence technician discussed the recovery of the stolen vehicle. And then came the forensic experts. Fingerprint analysts walked the jury through the AF's match, explaining how a latent print from 1978 could be, compared against millions of records in a national database. DNA analysts presented the results from the cigarette butts, the beer can, the palm print, and the hair. Laura Casey described the moment when she entered the old fingerprint into the database and received the match. Doug Heraut traced the investigation from the December 2008 identification through the confrontation with Watson and the discovery of the handwritten signature on the newspaper at the crime scene. The courtroom dynamics were unusual in ways that only a decades-old case can produce. The jury was being asked to consider events that predated the birth of some jurors. The apartment where the crime had occurred had likely changed hands multiple times. The bars where Bonnet spent his evenings may have ceased to exist. The Omaha of 1978 was a city that most people in the courtroom had never known. Yet the evidence, preserved in sealed bags in temperature-controlled storage for 33 years, was being presented as though the crime had happened weeks earlier. The defense strategy was limited, but was executed strategically. Watson's attorneys highlighted the challenges of prosecuting a case spanning 3 decades. They pointed to problems in the evidence chain that had accumulated through years of storage. They noted that one evidence bag contained a concert t-shirt from a 1983 Def Leppard tour, an item that could not possibly have been present at a 1978 crime scene. The implication was that evidence had been mixed, contaminated, or improperly stored across the decades. They also emphasized the missing note. The killer's taunting message, arguably the most dramatic piece of evidence in the case, was gone. Without the physical note, the defense argued, the prosecution was relying on descriptions and photographs of an item the jury could never examine directly. The defense's broader argument centered on reasonable doubt through alternative access. Bonnet was known to invite people to his apartment. Multiple men had stayed there, one had possessed a key to his vehicle. Watson's DNA and fingerprints could theoretically have been left during an unrelated visit at a different time. The passage of 33 years, the defense argued, made it impossible to establish a precise timeline for when the biological evidence was deposited. But the prosecution disassembled that argument with a single piece of evidence: the hair. Everything else, the cigarette butts, the beer can, the palm print, could theoretically be explained by innocent contact at a different time. But the hair embedded in biological material on a towel lying beside Carol Bonnet's body could not be explained through innocent contact. That hair placed Watson not in the apartment at some unspecified time, but at the body. At the moment that mattered, combined with the fingerprints on the bathroom door, consistent with someone attempting to wash blood from their hands, combined with the car driven directly to Watson's hometown in Cicero, combined with the DNA match across multiple items, combined with his own name written and scratched out on a newspaper at the scene, the circumstantial case became overwhelming. The jury listened to approximately a week and a half of testimony. When they retired to deliberate, they required only a few hours to reach their conclusion. On August 25, 2011, the jury found Jerry Watson guilty of first-degree murder and the use of a deadly weapon to commit a felony. Watson had told Detective Heraut, "I know that you can't have evidence that said I did it." He was wrong. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for October 17, 2011. Everyone involved in the case understood the weight of that date. October 17, 1978 was the date when Carol Bonnet's body was discovered. Now, exactly 33 years later, on the same date, the man who had killed him would learn his punishment. Whether the date was chosen deliberately or arrived through the workings of the court calendar, it carried significance that everyone in the courtroom felt. 33 years of silence, 33 years of a case that led nowhere, 33 years of a killer walking free, living his life, committing additional crimes, never once held accountable for the life he had taken in a downtown Omaha apartment. The judge sentenced Jerry Watson to life imprisonment for the first-degree murder conviction. An additional sentence of 10 to 20 years was imposed for the use of a deadly weapon charge. Watson, now 52 years old, would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated. He had been free for 33 years after murdering Carol Bonnet, longer as a free man than he would ever be as a prisoner. The mathematics of that reality are difficult to sit with. Carol Bonnet received 0 additional years. Jerry Watson received 33 years of freedom between his crime and his capture. And now the system that had failed to apprehend him in 1978 was finally taking those years back. The Bonnet murder became, at that moment, the oldest cold case ever solved by the Omaha Police Department. Watson did not accept the verdict gracefully. He appealed his conviction to the Nebraska Supreme Court, arguing that the 33-year delay between the crime and his indictment violated his constitutional rights. His attorneys contended that the passage of time had destroyed his ability to mount a proper defense, that witnesses had died, that evidence had degraded, that the delay itself was fundamentally unfair. The Nebraska Supreme Court disagreed. On March 15, 2013, the court upheld the conviction in a detailed opinion addressing each of Watson's claims systematically. The central finding was direct and almost poetic in its logic. The delay was not caused by prosecutorial misconduct or intentional delay. It was caused by the fact that the technology required to identify Watson simply did not exist. AFIS, the court noted, did not become operational until 1999, more than 2 decades after the crime. The Omaha Cold Case Unit was not established until 2008. The state had acted promptly once the identification was made. The delay was not a failure of the justice system. It was a function of the pace of technological evolution. Watson attempted again in 2017, filing a motion for post-conviction relief alleging 9 separate claims of ineffective assistance of counsel. On February 10, 2017, the Nebraska Supreme Court denied every claim. Jerry Watson remains incarcerated. His appeals are exhausted. The case is definitively closed. On August 24, 2012, the FBI presented its annual Latent Hit of the Year award to Laura Casey and Detective Doug Heraut of the Omaha Police Department. The award recognized the most significant latent fingerprint identification made through AFAs in a given year. The FBI produced a documentary-style video about the case featuring Casey, Heraut, Chief Deputy County Attorney Brenda Beadle, and retired crime lab technician Michael Stone. It was a rare moment of public recognition for work that typically occurs in fluorescent-lit laboratories and windowless offices. The people who solved Carol Bonnet's murder were not TV detectives. They were technicians, analysts, and investigators who executed their jobs with patience and precision, often without any guarantee that the work would yield results. Laura Casey entered a 30-year-old fingerprint into a computer database and changed the outcome of a murder case. She had joined the Omaha Crime Lab in 1995, years before the Bonnet case landed on her desk. She described it as the most memorable case of her entire career. But what made it memorable was not simply the outcome. It was the realization that the evidence had been there all along, waiting for someone to ask the right question in the right system at the right time. Doug Heraut took a fingerprint match and transformed it into a conviction. He traveled to Illinois and confronted a killer who believed himself untouchable. He collected the DNA that confirmed the crime. He found the clue that the killer himself had boasted about leaving behind. The work was painstaking. Heraut had to reconstruct a life story from 30-year-old records. He traced Watson's movements across multiple states. He coordinated DNA analysis with medical institutions. He built a prosecution file that could withstand the defense's inevitable challenges about evidence, age, and chain of custody. We were able to find a murderer who for 30 years thought he had gotten away with it. Heraut reflected, but Heraut also recognized that the work had not been solitary. Steve Vaccaro in the crime lab, Angela Adele and Kim Vanden Aker at the Nebraska State Patrol, Brenda Beadle in the county attorney's office, the unnamed Florida law enforcement official whose inquiry in December 2008 prompted the search in the first place. The person who made the decision to establish the cold case unit, the sequence of decisions and determinations that converged to produce justice. Solving a 30-year-old murder is not a one-person undertaking. It is a chain, and every link must hold. And Michael Stone, the man who started everything without ever knowing how it would end. Stone was 28 years old when he dusted that bathroom door in Carol Bonnet's apartment. He lifted the print, initialed the card, and spent years comparing it against every record he could access. He retired without a match. He stepped away from the job knowing that the answer might never come. When it finally did arrive, Stone captured the entire trajectory in a single observation. Technology had to catch up with the evidence that we had. That sentence contains the entire lesson of this case. The evidence was always there. The fingerprints were always there. The DNA was always there, preserved in cigarette butts and beer cans and a single hair. The killer's own name was always there, written in cursive and scratched through on a newspaper beside the body. Every piece of the puzzle was collected, cataloged, and stored within days of the murder in October 1978. The science simply was not ready. When it was ready, it took less than 5 hours to solve a 30-year-old murder. 5 hours against 30 years. That ratio tells you everything about the difference between possessing evidence and possessing the technology to interpret it. The answer was always there. It was sitting in a sealed container in a property room, written in the invisible language of ridge patterns and DNA sequences, waiting for the world to develop the capability to read it. Carol Bonnet deserved better than 33 years of silence. On October 17, 2011, exactly 33 years after his body was discovered on the floor of his apartment, a judge sentenced his killer to life imprisonment. The case that everyone assumed would stay buried came back. The fingerprints that couldn't be matched in 1978 were finally matched in 2008. The DNA that didn't exist as a forensic tool when Bonnet was alive confirmed the identification decades later. And the clue the killer dared police to find his own name written at the crime scene was discovered by a detective who refused to leave a single piece of evidence unexamined. Some cases close. This one came full circle. This is the story of Carol Bonnet, born January 13, 1917, found deceased October 17, 1978. Justice delivered October 17, 2011. Remembered here, incarcerated. He had been free for 33 years after murdering Carol Bonnet, longer as a free man than he would ever be as a prisoner. The mathematics of that reality are difficult to sit with. Carol Bonnet received 0 additional years. Jerry Watson received 33 years of freedom between his crime and his capture. And now the system that had failed to apprehend him in 1978 was finally taking those years back. The Bonnet murder became, at that moment, the oldest cold case ever solved by the Omaha Police Department. Watson did not accept the verdict gracefully. He appealed his conviction to the Nebraska Supreme Court, arguing that the 33-year delay between the crime and his indictment violated his constitutional rights. His attorneys contended that the passage of time had destroyed his ability to mount a proper defense, that witnesses had died, that evidence had degraded, that the delay itself was fundamentally unfair. The Nebraska Supreme Court disagreed. On March 15, 2013, the court upheld the conviction in a detailed opinion addressing each of Watson's claims systematically. The central finding was direct and almost poetic in its logic. The delay was not caused by prosecutorial misconduct or intentional delay. It was caused by the fact that the technology required to identify Watson simply did not exist. AFIS, the court noted, did not become operational until 1999, more than 2 decades after the crime. The Omaha Cold Case Unit was not established until 2008. The state had acted promptly once the identification was made. The delay was not a failure of the justice system. It was a function of the pace of technological evolution. Watson attempted again in 2017, filing a motion for post-conviction relief alleging 9 separate claims of ineffective assistance of counsel. On February 10, 2017, the Nebraska Supreme Court denied every claim. Jerry Watson remains incarcerated. His appeals are exhausted. The case is definitively closed. On August 24, 2012, the FBI presented its annual Latent Hit of the Year award to Laura Casey and Detective Doug Heraut of the Omaha Police Department. The award recognized the most significant latent fingerprint identification made through AFIS in a given year. The FBI produced a documentary-style video about the case featuring Casey, Heraut, Chief Deputy County Attorney Brenda Beadle, and retired crime lab technician Michael Stone. It was a rare moment of public recognition for work that typically occurs in fluorescent-lit laboratories and windowless offices. The people who solved Carol Bonnet's murder were not TV detectives. They were technicians, analysts, and investigators who executed their jobs with patience and precision, often without any guarantee that the work would yield results. Laura Casey entered a 30-year-old fingerprint into a computer database and changed the outcome of a murder case. She had joined the Omaha Crime Lab in 1995, years before the Bonnet case landed on her desk. She described it as the most memorable case of her entire career. But what made it memorable was not simply the outcome. It was the realization that the evidence had been there all along, waiting for someone to ask the right question in the right system at the right time. Doug Heraut took a fingerprint match and transformed it into a conviction. He traveled to Illinois and confronted a killer who believed himself untouchable. He collected the DNA that confirmed the crime. He found the clue that the killer himself had boasted about leaving behind. The work was painstaking. Heraut had to reconstruct a life story from 30-year-old records. He traced Watson's movements across multiple states. He coordinated DNA analysis with medical institutions. He built a prosecution file that could withstand the defense's inevitable challenges about evidence, age, and chain of custody. We were able to find a murderer who for 30 years thought he had gotten away with it. Heraut reflected, but Heraut also recognized that the work had not been solitary. Steve Vaccaro in the crime lab, Angela Adele and Kim Vanden Aker at the Nebraska State Patrol, Brenda Beadle in the county attorney's office, the unnamed Florida law enforcement official whose inquiry in December 2008 prompted the search in the first place. The person who made the decision to establish the cold case unit, the sequence of decisions and determinations that converged to produce justice. Solving a 30-year-old murder is not a one-person undertaking. It is a chain, and every link must hold. And Michael Stone, the man who started everything without ever knowing how it would end. Stone was 28 years old when he dusted that bathroom door in Carol Bonnet's apartment. He lifted the print, initialed the card, and spent years comparing it against every record he could access. He retired without a match. He stepped away from the job knowing that the answer might never come. When it finally did arrive, Stone captured the entire trajectory in a single observation. Technology had to catch up with the evidence that we had. That sentence contains the entire lesson of this case. The evidence was always there. The fingerprints were always there. The DNA was always there, preserved in cigarette butts and beer cans and a single hair. The killer's own name was always there, written in cursive and scratched through on a newspaper beside the body. Every piece of the puzzle was collected, cataloged, and stored within days of the murder in October 1978. The science simply was not ready. When it was ready, it took less than 5 hours to solve a 30-year-old murder. 5 hours against 30 years. That ratio tells you everything about the difference between possessing evidence and possessing the technology to interpret it. The answer was always there. It was sitting in a sealed container in a property room, written in the invisible language of ridge patterns and DNA sequences, waiting for the world to develop the capability to read it. Carol Bonnet deserved better than 33 years of silence. On October 17, 2011, exactly 33 years after his body was discovered on the floor of his apartment, a judge sentenced his killer to life imprisonment. The case that everyone assumed would stay buried came back. The fingerprints that couldn't be matched in 1978 were finally matched in 2008. The DNA that didn't exist as a forensic tool when Bonnet was alive confirmed the identification decades later. And the clue the killer dared police to find his own name written at the crime scene was discovered by a detective who refused to leave a single piece of evidence unexamined. Some cases close. This one came full circle. This is the story of Carol Bonnet, born January 13, 1917, found deceased October 17, 1978. Justice delivered October 17, 2011. Remembered here.